Oh, I get applause too, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Becker, Professor of the Arts and Dean Emerita of the School of the Arts. Thank you to, where is he, the fabulous Gavin Browning, Director of Public Programs, who has done such a terrific job coordinating this event. He's back there. Thank you. Thank you to Dean Sarah Cole, to Laura Wagle, and the entire LenFest team, the A-team, for hosting us tonight. We have two very beloved and amazing artists with us tonight. As part of a series that I curate, often in collaboration with others, it's called Where Ideas Come From. And it's always an experiment that brings together artists and scholars, scientists and theorists from multiple disciplines in conversation with each other to discuss where ideas originate, reside, how they morph, evolve, and then affect consciousness and society. And in April, we're going to do another event collaborating with neuroscientist Daphne Shohami, who leads the Zuckerman Mind-Brain Behavior Institute, and playwright Sarah Rule, who is their current writer-in-residence, to discuss the science, poetics, and complexities of memory. Tonight, we at the School of the Arts are collaborating with my dear friend and colleague, Dominique Townsend, and the Center for Buddhist Studies that she directs. And we are completely thrilled to bring together two extraordinary creators who each work in and across many forms. Artist Laurie Anderson, who we proudly claim as both an alum of Barnard and the School of the Arts, and poet, novelist, photographer, Vuong. And first, I'm going to introduce Dominique Townsend, who will then properly present our guests to you. So Dominique Townsend is the director of the Center for Buddhist Studies and the J. Tsongkhapa Associate Professor of Tibetan Buddhism in the Department of Religion at Columbia. She studied Buddhism as an undergraduate at Barnard and then lived in Tibetan communities in India and Nepal before pursuing her master's at the Harvard Divinity School. And after completing her PhD at Columbia in the Department of East Asian Languages and Culture, she worked as head of interpretation at the Rubin Museum, and then she taught for 10 years at Bard College. And she returned to Columbia in 2024 as a tenured professor and to lead the center. She is a master of many languages, a writer of several scholarly books, and one gorgeously illustrated children's book adapted from the Buddhist teachings of Shantideva called How to Wake Up a Hero. And she's also a poet. Her current research is on the significance of dreams in the Tibetan Buddhist experience, and I'm hoping we'll do another event together soon focused on her Tibetan dream research. When you entered this evening, hopefully you received a card, and please use it for your questions. We will group them all together so that we can answer as many as possible. Cody and Dylan are also here from Book Culture. And Ocean and Laurie will be signing books and albums after the event, so please stay for that. We are so grateful to have Laurie Anderson, Ocean Vuong, and Dominique Townsend here tonight with such a great audience to receive them. And I'm now going to turn this over to Dominique. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that really generous introduction, and also for collaborating on this program. So happy that we're bringing everybody together. So I also want to reiterate the thanks to Gavin, who thought of everything, and to the School of the Arts, and to everyone here at LenFest. It's really such a pleasure to be together. And of course, I want to thank all of you for coming. So I'll say very briefly that the Center for Buddhist Studies was founded in 1988 by Robert Thurman, who was then the Je Tsongkhapa Chair of Tibetan Buddhism here at Columbia. And the mission of the center primarily focuses on the translation of the Tibetan Buddhist canon into English. And that project continues strong. It's an important historic project and one that that many people contribute to. The other aspect of the Center for Buddhist Studies has been long quiet. For a little bit over 10 years, there hasn't been public programming connected to the center, and that's because Professor Thurman had retired and I had not yet arrived. So tonight is really the inaugural event for this sort of new generation of the Center for Buddhist Studies, so we're thrilled to be here together. And I do hope to collaborate more with Carol and to have more events, particularly around the subject of Buddhist practice and creative practice. So for this evening, the inspiration was, really thinking about the work of Laurie Anderson and Ocean Vuong. I happen to know that they both have Buddhist practice. That's just something, that I knew about both of them. But the real reason that I wanted to bring them together is that in very subtle ways, each of their work, to me, suggests certain of these very, very important elements in Buddhist values and Buddhist ethics and Buddhist creativity. And in particular, I'm thinking about their acute perception, their willingness to pay attention, their profound insight, their compassion. And really, I also want to emphasize the strength that comes through in both of their work. So for me, I see these, of course, not as uniquely Buddhist qualities, but I had the intuition that these qualities are connected to their Buddhist practice. And my motivation for bringing them together was somewhat intuitive. I thought that they would have great chemistry and that they would be happy to collaborate, and I'm thrilled that that is the case. So you're all in for a real treat. So without further ado, I'll just give you a quick idea about what the run of show will be. So Ocean and Laurie will come up and perform an interlude of spoken word and some music. And then afterwards, I'll join them, and we will all have a discussion about the topic of how creative practice relates to Buddhist practice, particularly rooted in their work. So I think they don't need much introduction, but I'll say briefly, Laurie Anderson is revered for her multimedia presentations. She's also a visual artist, composer, poet, photographer, filmmaker, electronics whiz, vocalist, and instrumentalist. Ocean Vuong, also revered by many of us here and by many globally, a revered writer, NYU professor, and photographer. If you haven't seen Ocean's photography, I highly recommend that you make a small pilgrimage to Kingston, New York, where Ocean has an exhibition up currently. And actually, I think Laurie has an exhibition up of sculpture up, right, in Savannah. It's a little bit further of a pilgrimage. So without further ado, thank you all for coming, and please join me in welcoming Laurie Anderson and Ocean Vuong.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'd like to, Laurie and I and Dominique would like to dedicate this performance on behalf of Renee Good and Alex Preddy and Geraldo Campos and the people who have lost their lives to the tyrannical violence of ICE on this country. May both the perpetrators and the victims find lasting peace, both in this realm and all realms, their grace. Thank you. Mi mian te wei te jin jin re zi jie mei jin bei wan bo zhang bo yo gan jing ge bei ton jambe shabla tuad mi mien se wei te jin jin rezi jin mei jin be wan po jambe gan jian ge bei tu jian song ga ba lo zong zhang bei sha le zu de mi mian zi wei te jian jian rui jian mei jian bei wan po zhang bei yong. Beautiful short loser. Stand back. I'm a loser on a winning streak. I got your wedding dress on backward, playing air guitar in these streets. I taste my mouth the most, and what a blessing. The most normal things about me are my shoulders. You've been warned. Where I'm from, it's only midnight for a second, and the trees look like grandfathers laughing in the rain. For as long as I can remember, I've had a preference for mediocre bodies, including this one. Tell me, how come the past tense is always longer? Is the memory of a song the shadow of a sound, or is that too much? Sometimes when I can't sleep, I imagine Van Gogh singing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah into his cut ear and feeling peace. Green voices in the rain, green rain in the voices. Oh no, the sadness is intensifying. How rude. Hey, can you get me out of here? That one time Jackson passed out beside a triple stack of jumbo pancakes at Denny's after top surgery. I can't believe I lost my tits, he said a minute before, smiling through tears. The sadness in him ends in me tonight. It ends tonight, I shouted to the cop who pulled us over for dreaming. I'm not high, officer. I just don't believe in you. Tomorrow, partly cloudy with a chance. I'm done talking, sir. I'm saying what I feel. Inside my head, the war is everywhere. I'm on the cliff of myself, and these aren't wings, they're futures. For as long as I can remember, my body was the president's nightmare. Now, I'm a beautiful short loser dancing in the green. Do you think I'll need a gun where we're going? Can you believe my uncle worked at the Coke factory for 15 years only to use a belt at the end? Talk about discipline, talk about good Lord. Maybe he saw that a small thing moving through a large thing is more like a bird in a cage than a word in the mouth. Nobody's free without breaking open. I'm not sad, he told me once, laughing. I'm just always here. See, officer, magic is real. We all disappear. Why aren't you laughing? No, not beauty, but you and I outliving it, which is more so. Somehow I got me for days, got this late light in the yard, leaving blood on the bone-colored fence. This thrash of spring we drown in to stay a while, and mean it, I mean it when I say I'm mostly male. That I recall every follicle in the failure, the way they will remember God after religion, alone, impossible, and good. I know the room you've been crying in is called America. I'm sorry the door is not invented yet. Finally, after years, I'm now a professional loser. I'm crushing it in losses. I'm mopping the floor where Jackson's drain bags leaked on his way to bed. I'm done talking, officer. I'm dancing in the rain with a wedding dress, and it makes sense. Because my uncle decided to leave this world intact. Because taking a piece of my friend away from him made him more whole. Because where I'm from, the trees look like family laughing in my head. Because I'm the last of my kind at the beginning of hope. Because what I did with my one short, beautiful life was lose it on a winning streak.
You know, last spring, I was asked to be in a big festival in Austria. And it was music and dance and theater and writing. And the theme of the festival was the rise of fascism in Europe. And they asked me to do a 2-hour talk about this. And they said, we want you to talk about the relationship between government and love. Now, I'd never really gotten an assignment like that, so I said, I'm going to go for this. But what do these two things have in common? What do they have to do with each other? So what is government? And what is love? The first person I thought of along these lines was the American writer Cornel West, who said, justice is what love looks like in public. But you know, I'm thinking of a recent conversation between the American Vice President and the new Pope. And the Vice President is a recent convert to Catholicism. And he often talks about St. Augustine and what he called the Ordo Amoris, or the so-called Order of Love. Now, the idea here is that love is a series of concentric circles, and at the center is your family, and then, so you take care of them first, and then your neighbor, and then the people in your city, then in your country, and the people out there, the outer rings, not your problem. They should just, kind of go back where they came from. And J.D. talks about this kind of love when he talks about deportation, collecting people without documents and deporting them, often to jails in other countries. Meanwhile, the new Pope, Leo XIV, is from Chicago, which is my hometown. His name's Bob. And in this conversation, he said, "No, Mr. Vice President, your concentric circle model isn't the right way to look at this." And then he said 4 words: "We don't rank love." And I thought, can I convert right now? Because who has the courage to say this in our world? And so you have to wonder, what is love? What is government? And I'm thinking back now to when I was 13 and I ran for president of student government in my school. This was in Illinois, and Senator John F. Kennedy was campaigning in Wisconsin. So I wrote a letter to him. "Dear Senator Kennedy, I really admire the way you're running your campaign in Wisconsin, and I'm running for president of my student council, and I wondered if you could just give me some advice." About 2 weeks later, I got a letter. It was from the office of Senator Jack Kennedy, postmarked Washington, D.C. "Dear Laurie, I'm glad to know you're participating in your student government." And then there was a long list of suggestions about how to run a campaign. But he said the most important thing here is spend time with your fellow students, find out what they want, and promise it. In other words, don't make them, make up theories, be a real representative. And it was signed sincerely, Jack Kennedy. About a month later, I wrote to him again. "Dear Senator Kennedy, I want to thank you for your advice, and I'm sorry I didn't write you earlier, but I've been very busy. I won the election, and best wishes in your own campaign. Sincerely, Laurie Anderson." Actually, there's still lots of 13-year-olds around who believe they are the center of the world. And I was definitely one of them. But then a few days later, something really amazing happened. A large special delivery truck arrived at our house. And this had never happened before. And I ran to the door, and a man in a uniform handed me a telegram and a big white box. The telegram said, "Congratulations on your election, Jack Kennedy." And inside the box were 12 red roses. And of course, this was front page news in the Glen Ellen News, our local paper. "Local girl receives roses from Senator Kennedy." And every woman in town fell in love with Jack. Meanwhile, Our government is changing every day. So many things evaporating, disappearing. Right to speech, to assembly. Gone. Almost overnight. What do you do when you lose your country? Where do you go? And I'm thinking of the Russian writer Vasily Rosanov, who said, you know, it's like when the show is over. The audience gets up to leave their seats, time to collect their coats and go home. They turn around. No more coats. No more home. Some people walk on water. Some people walk on broken glass. Some just walk round and round in their dreams. Some just keep falling down. So when you see a man who's broken, pick him up and carry him. And when you see a woman who's broken, put her all into your arms. Because we don't know where we come from. We don't know what we are. So when you see a man who's broken, pick him up and carry him. And when you see a woman who's broken, put her all into your arms. So we don't know where we come from. We don't know what we are. drum suit doesn't work. Doom, 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 doom. You back there? This is such a cool drum suit, I'm telling you. No? Okay, I'm gonna just see if I can get it to work. You got it up back there? Let's see. I think we're gonna skip this one. But I'm gonna tell you what it was about anyway. No, it's gone. Okay. You got it? No, he doesn't. Okay. What I wanted to tell you about is 3 rules. You know how life goes by so fast, and there's never really enough time to think, what should I do? You know. So my husband Lou and I made 3 rules to live by, so you wouldn't have to think things through each time when things happen. So here they are. Number 1, don't be afraid of anybody. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you weren't afraid of anybody? Number 2, get a really good bullshit detector and learn how to use it. The second part's really important. And last is be really tender. But you know, so many people are so angry now. I'm thinking about the great Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron, and what she said about anger. She said, try to see what anger is. Go to the bottom of anger. Go down to the roots of this feeling. You will always find the same thing at the bottom. At the bottom of anger, there was always, always, always a broken heart.
You know, my favorite song is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. But recently, I learned the second verse, which goes kind of apocalyptic. Goes like this. When the blazing sun is gone, when there's nothing to shine upon, twinkle, twinkle, little star. Now I wonder what you are. And speaking of stars, you know the reason I really love the stars is that we cannot hurt them. We can't burn them, or flood them, or make them overflow. We can't blow them up, or turn them out. But we are reaching for them. We are reaching for them.
I'm pouring water because I think we need a second. Thank you both so much. So as I mentioned, I invited both of you to talk about Buddhist practice and creative practice because I know that you both have a deep relationship with Buddhism. But I think that you came to it maybe on very different paths. Ocean, I understand your family is Buddhist. You grew up in a Buddhist household. I saw in your photography the presence of shrines and altars that seem to be very personal. And I also know that your current practice engages with Tibetan Buddhism. So I'm curious, I'd like to hear from both of you. Laurie, I know you also have a deep relationship with Tibetan Buddhism as well as other traditions. So would you both just tell us how you came to those particular practices?
Well, my family raised me Buddhist, but for them it went as far as just putting fruit on the altar. And when I said, well, why? Who's eating it? You know, we're just getting fruit flies everywhere. My mother said, that's just the way it is, you know. And so it was deeply cultural, but I think growing up the way I did, I just realized that maybe it's a method, maybe there's a way out of suffering, and that I could look at it like a blueprint. And so when I was 17, I decided to be a monk. I said, I gotta get out of here somehow. And I went to my guidance counselor, as one does, in Hartford, Connecticut. And I said, look, I know your job is to get me into college, but I want to be a monk. And I knew nothing about anything, right? In fact, he had a banner on in his office, and it said, ASCO. And I said, what kind of guidance counselor has ASCO on their office? And he said, it's Assumption College. But that's how but that's how little I knew. But I said, I'm going to be a monk, and there's a university in California called the University of the West. And I was raised on Journey to the West. And so I was like, I'm gonna go to the West and become a monk. And I said, it's a university, so you got to get me there. You're a guidance counselor. And he said, he looked at it, he turned around his computer, he's like, I never heard of this, what is this? And then he says, well, unfortunately, it's not accredited, so I can't get you there. So you're going to go to community college instead. And that's where I found writing. And so I took a different path at that fork in the road. It was interesting because that conversation happened in October, and by February, the school was accredited. I checked years later, so you know, just a few months away, and I would have been sitting here in brown robes. Perhaps it's not too late. But from then on, I said, to me, I think writing is a medium to understand this world, and therefore to understand suffering. And I still haven't really understood it, but I've been blessed with seeing people and expanding the medium of language so that it can hold suffering as an architecture, so that it can then be shared and understood with others. And so that's the beauty of sound too. What Laurie just did here was this kind of open weather system. You know, I think that's what I feel when people say, what does that poem mean? I said, well, what does the rain mean? You inhabit it as it inhabits you. And I feel like I point to sound and music when people ask me to make poetry legible. And I said, the only legibility is to be inside it and let it move through your nervous system.
Do you have any regrets about not being a monk?
Every day.
No, really?
Oh, yeah.
Really? What are they?
I feel like, sometimes I feel like, and maybe I'm being romantic about it, but I feel like a monk has much more efficacy in the work that I'm trying to do, that they're at the heart of it. Meanwhile, I have to, tend to my family, I have to tend to communities, all of which are not a burden to me. But then I'm in like the writing world, and that gets messy. There's egos involved, there's fashion magazines involved. And it's interesting because that's how you get a voice, right? Like in order to frame your work on your terms, you have to agree to be a spectacle. You then become a scarecrow for Prada, Valentino, because that's how these magazines are funded, right? So, which is why the photo shoot often happens before the interview, right? You go get a photo shoot, you become a scarecrow for couture, the magazine gets this cut, you're a spectacle, then the journalist comes, and then you get to frame things on your terms. So I agree to do it for now, but I think I'm eyeing a way out of it because I don't see it as efficient as being in the monkhood. But it was the karma that I received. It was the path. That few months difference led me here. So I imagine that there is work to be done. I just learned of this Swedish phrase that goes, "You must dig where you stand." And I really believe in that. I think wherever your life takes you, you must try to make something out of it the best you can. And I don't have the fortitude at this point to be a monk. I don't have the courage to forsake my family and turn away from them. That takes an immense amount of inner resources and power to let go of your community in order to study suffering. I don't have the chops yet for that. If I'm very lucky in this lifetime, I will, but hopefully in the next few lifetimes, I'll be wearing the brown robes.
You must live where you stand? That's a...
Dig where you stand.
Oh, dig where you stand.
Yeah.
I'm hearing it coming back from the speakers around there. I'm trying to lip read. You must dig where you stand. The Swedes said that. Wow, what does that mean?
I guess it means that don't ask for other people's things and desiring something else. Work with what you got.
But dig is looking for something, or or does that mean just plant yourself?
Yeah, a filmmaker told me that, so I don't know. Maybe he was digging to put camera poles down or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm surprised.
He was understaffed. He was severely understaffed. It was an indie film.
I don't know. It's a surprising thing for Swedes to say, I think, because they're on the go, kind of, I don't know. My background was half Southern Baptist, and the other one was the Swedes, the Swedish Evangelical Mission Covenant people, where I grew up, and that was a. Now I can't. So the dig where you stand. It was more like a coffee church, really. You would listen to sermons on Sunday, and they would say, it's good to be nice to other people. Your life is going to be better. It'll be easier. Let's go drink some coffee. So everyone would go down to the fellowship room, get wired on coffee. The rest of the Sunday was like, it was really, they were sturdy people going places. And that's how I probably got into Buddhism, because I just was losing focus. I was just doing too many things. And a friend of mine said, he had just been to a 10-day Vipassana meditation, and this was back in the 70s. And when the first wave of Americans who had been to China were coming back, and they decided, let's kind of make a place where we can show people this magic, show Americans what's going on. And so it was, Jack Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg, so many teachers who came in a wave, and brought this message to people. And so I got it from a friend who said that he had been at this meditation, and that the chatter had stopped, and that his mind had become focused as a kind of beam, and he could shift it here, move it there. And I thought, whoa, that sounds amazing. So I checked in. They said, at the Vipassana Center, they had a little greeting table, and they said, well, welcome, you're here, I guess, because you're in pain. And I was like, nah, I'm here to get a mind like a beam. And they said, no, I think it's pain. I said, no, it's a beam. And they said, pain and beam, back and forth. You know, like, I said, this is a terrible way to start arguing with each other. And but I did learn that I was there because of pain. When you sit for, and those times, it was super hardcore. It was, you know, you were meditating for 18 hours a day. It's a little lighter now, but it was really, and so as you sit there, all of these things come up, and you realize how you're storing pain, and that every time something happens to you and you don't just scream, you put it somewhere, you file it, and it's a very elegant system, the way as you learn where it's put, and you find that anger goes right to your jaw and locks it up. Jealousy goes to your liver. You're like, oh. Heartbreak and loss to you feel it you literally feel it in your heart. You are a library of pain. You just then look around and try to find it and break it up a little bit. So I like that sort of approach to pain because the more familiar idea, or for me as a Western person, was that language could crack those things, and that you could explore your childhood or whatever through stories. This never worked for me. I would just make stuff up, and still do. And so I don't really trust that, but the body has a way of being very, very clear. And the body has a mind of its own, and it will tell you things. And so I thought, for me, it was really a shock to be in such a visceral place. You know, when I thought it was going to be mental, it was very visceral.
Did you feel the practice changing your art in any way?
Changing
your art, yeah.
Yeah.
Changing the way you work.
The very first thing was I was doing a lot of sculpture. Then actually, I used to be a sculptor student across the street in Prentice, and they have not painted my studio since 50 years. I went there recently. They haven't painted it. I know, Carol. I know. Paint's expensive. But what happened for me was I was. After the 10 days, I was like, suddenly had a whole lot of peripheral vision that I never thought I had. And so I could see out here. I could see what was going on out here. And I started thinking, what's behind me? And so my entire focus of, sort of predator versus prey vision, it became more less of a predator and more of prey, so that you're just always aware of what's going on around you. That was really a thrill for me as a sculptor, to feel space in a very different way. It was just really radical. So.
May I put that question to you, Ocean? Do you feel ways that your practice has shaped your creative work?
I must agree with Laurie. I think meditation, you feel like your brain is larger, not because you're smarter, but that your nervous system is absorbing more of the world. The sponge is more capacious in a way, and and then everything is. But also the idea of non-dualism, that there is no binaries, that behind every villain is a person failing. And so I thought it went against the Western modes of storytelling, because right away it's man versus man versus world, and man versus nature. And I felt like the fabrication of conflict as something valuable to storytelling felt arbitrary and redundant to me. And Buddhism taught me that to come here as a person means you come from a karmically historical journey, that to be alive is to be in conflict because history is a conflicted space. And it's that to put things in proximity, in the same way we have hydrogen, fine on its own, oxygen, fine on its own, put it into a cup, it's water. So that proximity itself is transformation because every person, every element already has the 5 aggregates that come way before us. And so that's the great mystery. And you understand more about your life by experiencing it, right? And so I think it taught me not to judge the world. There's so much judgment, and as a writer, it helps you describe things. It helps you make things strange as well. You know, is it enough to call it a sunset? You know, a red sunset in the evening. Or as Isaac Babel in The Red Calvary describes it, the sun dips along the low red hills as if beheaded. And I'm like, oh, if you pay attention enough, you can write a sentence that the human species has never received before. Because I checked that sentence from Babel. I said, it didn't come before that, right? So in 1929, Babel gave us that sentence. And that's when I realized that writing is metaphysical. What that sentence does, as opposed to the more mimetic sentence, the red sunset in the evening, is that opens a kind of subjective interiority. And it's both manipulation of time, because in that sentence, the second clause moves the sunset at the speed of a beheading, which is stunning. There's no other technology that can do that. You can take a time-lapse shot in film of a sunset going down, but it will not imbue it with that kind of information. And you won't need to know that Babel was a war correspondent during the Soviet-Polish War. You can feel all of that inside that description. And I was stunned. I learned recently, there's a theory that the faster your metabolism, the slower time feels to you. Right? And so then I'm like, oh, is it Buddhism, or is there like a subgenre of twink literature wherein there is no plot, but all description for pages and pages? I was like, is it their fault, or is it they just seeing things slower, right? There's no plot in twink literature because it's too slow. They're feeling everything. I'm still working on that theory, but for now, I'm going to go with the more respectable Buddhist theory that I'm feeling so much, and that why plot is sidelined because there's so much detail to describe.
Thank you both. When we talked about this event almost a year ago, I asked them that question, do you feel that your Buddhist practice and your creative practice are connected in important ways? And if I remember correctly, you looked at each other and almost in unison you said, they're the same. So thank you for elaborating on that. I wanted to invoke the Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh. He has a wonderful poem, as he calls them, for meditation. Present moment, wonderful moment. And I wanted to put this to both of you in these times which are so painful and frightening and full of uncertainty and acute pain for so many. How does that land for you when we think of someone who, like Thich Nhat Hanh, someone who had suffered so much, who was born into such, he suffered so much warfare and then spent his life as an activist and continues to be such a beacon in regard to teaching meditation and mindfulness. So I wanted to put to you, present moment, wonderful moment. What does that mean to you today?
Present moment?
Wonderful moment. Present moment.
Present moment. Well, I think, thanks for that, the sun image, because I really think that framing things in a certain way can help you so much. I'm just thinking now of a series of books that I really love on the calculation of volume by Solveig Balu, a Danish writer. How many people have read this book? Yeah, and those of you who haven't, you have such a wonderful thing ahead of you. This book kind of changed my life in a lot of ways, because it's a woman who's stuck in time, and she's stuck on the November 18th, and she can't get out of it. And it's a Groundhog Day thing, but 10 pages in, you're seeing the whole world in such a radically different way. I never read a book that did that, and I was really shocked that I could suddenly pay attention in a way that I never had. And this is my goal as an artist, to open my eyes and see what's there, not what I think is going to be there. What's there? And this book pushes you into that, and and it's not that the language is so sort of specific. It's just that the feeling of time stopping, I guess, and you have this incredible luxury to look around you. And I think that when I'm trying to process what's going on in the world, I think of that way of seeing things, and time expands in a really wild way. And I'm thinking, and I have a very different feeling about what's going on, and a different sense of agency about what's going on. What am I doing about this? And not just kind of going, why are they doing that? So I stopped doing that, and that's been the most valuable thing that I've learned about how to survive now, is to pay attention to exactly what's in front of you, and really, really open your eyes to that. And it's really, and then you start seeing it in a much more expansive way. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tinatan, or Thai, as we like to so fondly call the dear Zen master, because to the Western world, he's a peace guru, a Zen teacher, but for the Vietnamese people in diaspora, he's also an elder, now an ancestor, and a survivor, and I was really touched. There was an anecdote that Thai said. He said to his disciples at Plum Village, he says, when I give talks to Vietnamese people, I have to speak differently, because there's already an unspoken pain that is understood. There's a subtext, right? And that subtext allows me to go into places that I have to build up for Western audiences. For Vietnamese audience, I don't have to. And I think that awareness of the present moment, but also who's here, right? It's not just, I think my one critique of the Westernization of Buddhist practice is that it's so self-absorbed as a kind of self-medication, right? I need to get myself healed from my discomfort. But, as Thich Nhat Hanh always talks about, engaged Buddhism is Buddhism that is aware of nature, sure, your breath, but also who is around you, who is in danger around you, who is being snatched out of their bedrooms around you, and what you can do to what you owe to your communities, because you cannot practice for yourself if your neighbors are not safe. And of course, in the Tibetan tradition, you have the wrathful deities. And I think it's interesting that the West kind of doesn't know what to do with the wrathful deities. It's like meditation, yoga, breathing, mindfulness, but the wrathful deities, like Akula, are the ones that bring vengeance in order to preserve peace and to violently, like wrathfully, snap you back into compassion, so that you're not just like waiting for compassion to happen, right? So it's almost like you are in danger, the house is on fire, the wrathful deity comes to protect and act so that you can preserve your practice for the communities. And I think this is all historically, particularly in Asia, like Buddhist communities often have to respond to existential threats, right? For their communities, natural disasters. And so I think it's important to see that too, that Buddhism is not just this self-healing. It heals itself, but you can't do that if your community is in danger or your neighbor is in danger. And Thich Nhat Hanh's central practice is that it has to go beyond the monastery. It has to, because throughout his life, many of his monasteries and communities have devolved and been destroyed by governments, by fire, by floods. And so it's never about structures, right? Any space is only as safe as we allow it to be. Otherwise, the space is just a room. And I think Buddhism's activation of that awareness is not just, who am I, what am I seeing, but who are you? What do I recognize in you? What do you need? What can I do? Going out on alms, right? I think why I wanted to be a monk, because to me, the monks were like superheroes. Like they were like the strongest people I knew. And they were introduced also because the women who raised me revered them. They cooked with monks on TV, with tapes being recited. And the women in my family were so open with their feelings. They cried openly, they laughed openly, often in the same breath. And I never saw crying and laughing as weakness. It was so surprising to me as an American boy to realize that crying was such a faux pas. We apologize for it. I'm sorry, I couldn't control myself. I lost myself there. I got emotional. We use euphemisms. But when I saw the women in my family listening to monks' lectures and openly weeping, it was such a dignified, powerful thing. And I'm so lucky that I got to receive that. That sadness is not just a feeling, passively felt, but it's also a system of historic knowledge. That one feels these things because of a reckoning with what has happened to us. And I felt like they were my idols, and I wanted to be a monk so that my grandmother and my mother could look to me the same way they looked at these other monks. I wanted to be this kind of defiant, dignified hero in their kitchen, because that's how Buddhism functioned in our life in Hartford.
Thank you. I know there are questions being gathered, so I should have announced before, but there are cards if you'd like to contribute a question. Okay, great. Before we turn to those, so I think they're still being gathered, I'm curious, both of you, as I mentioned in the opening, I feel so much compassion in both of your work, and both of you have been talking about the way your Buddhist practice also encourages or trains you to see others, to attend to others, to pay attention to the present moment and also to others. I wonder how that figures into the way that you work. Do you feel more stimulated working in collaboration or on your own, or how do those two ways of working connect with these concepts of thinking about the other?
What do you think?
Well, for me, I think it's made me more interested in conversation and duets and situations where it's not just what I think and what I am, or but some conflict. And so I really appreciate making songs about that, and or also situations where it's two people who have very, very, very different points of view. So that's and pushing against each other. So I think, and I didn't used to do that before. I was much more of a, this is what I think and how I see things, and instead of being, having somebody else there going, really? Is that really true? Is that really, really true? You know, so that for me was a kind of revelation. I also learned that in other ways. I used to tour with William Burroughs, and he was very a master of the second person, and he was always, maybe because it was clubs and it wasn't just the readers in a book, but he was talking to you, people who are here tonight, that kind of thing. It was really a shock that people then, oh, you mean me? He's talking to me, and otherwise the tours were a little bit rough because it's like basically Bill really liked guns a lot, so he'd be disappearing from the green room and he'd be out in the parking lot practicing target practice, and also he didn't really like women, so. But we got along just because he really made me laugh. I really, really don't want to ever underestimate that. And if there's one thing that I find a little bit constricting about my practice, is that there's not enough raucous laughter. I wish there was more like, I'm glad you mentioned the wrathful deities, because but I really trust. It's really hard to fake laughing, huh? It's very hard to fake it. So, when you really laugh, you trust it. So I've learned to trust that in a way that I trust music. I could hear it. You like you were saying, how do you know that that's interesting or good? You just feel it. Or you have some little rules. Like when I was working with Brian Eno, we always had this rule. We were mixing in this place right next to the Hudson River, and whenever we were insecure about whether the music was working, we would just stop and turn the music on and turn the mix on, whatever it was, and look at the river. And if there was conflict with those things, we would start over. But if it seemed right, and it wasn't the river, it had a million moods, the Hudson River. It was choppy or crazy or smooth or silky or all these kinds of things. But our motto was, if it goes with the river, it goes on the record. So we really trusted this connection to nature and to something that was alive, not a theory, but that could make us feel like, whoa, feel something. And it didn't have to conform to some, like, this is that, or this is that, or this is right, or this is wrong. It was just, there was none of that. So it's just how you feel. So I learned to trust that more than anything.
Thank you. I'll take a question now from our audience. Any guidance toward mindfulness in the face of what feels like an inescapable digital landscape? How do you maintain mindfulness in the face of email?
You just turned it on. You had a solution.
I just turned my email off today. I had an away message that said, I will be away indefinitely until I figure it out. And it felt so powerful. It was like, maybe it's like putting a fake dam on something that will flood me later. But right now, I felt that's only 5 hours ago. So I'm on the dopamine high.
It's piling up.
Well, we are in a very tricky place, I think. Because I think if we think about Marx's idea of labor as something that we are forced to do. And Marx believed that revolutions are inevitable under capitalism, that the worker would eventually decide it's not worth it anymore to be trapped in the factory when their life and their leisure and their selfhood is washed away. But that was still the human being as a workforce, but now the human being has become the commodity. And, you know, I've been teaching for 12 years, and I've watched my students get more and more biologically, through dopamine, hooked on the devices. And so we are now in a kind of inconceivable position where it's no longer picking between, you know, working and your life. Now there's an overflow of leisure. There's a kind of leisure that actually leads to burnout, where we are being harvested by corporations. These devices and technology has kind of kept us hostage. And that, when we think about agency, just like in any addiction, you know, you go to AA, you go through these cycles, you know that there's so little agency in that. And also the onset of AI, taking, you know, streamlining labor. But I've always felt that I never understood, at least for a writer, I can only speak as a writer, I never understood why AI would be enticing to a writer, because the whole idea of working with the sentence is to test your human consciousness against the technology of syntax. In other words, I want to write about love. Well, what does love look like with syntax through me? The reward is immediately at the desk. Publication and all that is just the medium of dissemination. But why would you want to offload that result, that experiment to a machine? I don't understand. But I also think there is some hope in that right now the machines are not able to replicate historical contingency. In other words, we saw what happened to Miyazaki's aesthetics a couple years ago when, you know, ChatGPT stole it. But why did those renditions feel so cold and lifeless? It's because it could replicate the art, the vibe, but it could never replicate the historical contingency of Hayao Miyazaki making decisions in space and time. That is, a person, a Japanese man coming out of fascism, experiencing 2 atomic bombs dropped on his country, and then asking himself, how do I make art that is approachable to young Japanese people, that also engages the darkest pages of human history? Genocide, fascism, ecological despair, consumerism, greed, the loss of self and community. How do I do that? Oh, I will develop this rounded, charming Studio Ghibli aesthetic to address something that is absolutely needed in space and time. AI cannot have that. It can only replicate the product of that. So I think eventually it will get there, unfortunately. But right now, it's dependent on us to pay attention and come up with human solutions. And I think that's why the sentence is so interesting to me. When I see my students, you know, I give them the same prompt. All 13 students come out with different sentences. I was like, that's it. That's why we're doing this. Why would you want to give this, pardon to sound so romantic about it, but this miracle, the sentence is like a thumbprint of the personhood. Why would you hand that over to a machine is beyond me.
Thank you. Laurie, do you want to answer that?
Well, I'm glad you're using the word attention, because it's so key to this. Because when you finish that sentence about love and you want to give it to people, it is to get their attention also. Yeah. You know, so, and when we get every 15 minutes a memo from our president about the latest tariff or whatever, he says, thank you for your attention to this matter. And this is what as you say, the commodity is, and that it is all about getting your attention. And that is what Buddhism is about as well. Your attention. What are you doing with your attention? And you have a choice also. You have a lot of agency. That's my phone. Sorry.
Getting
By
our
the way,
attention.
I have talking of speaking of messages. One of my friends has a really long. You call him and. You hear this rustling around, like you hear some little music in the background, and you're just like, and then some more rustling, and then maybe like some clinking and clacking. And then after about 30 seconds, you hear this voice that says, I never, ever listen to my messages. And I call this number so often just to hear that. Just to be in that 30 seconds of like somebody else's life, just doing whatever, and just to be in that zone of nothing's happening, and then to hear this ever, I mean never, listen to these. So,
Thank you.
I don't bother ever leaving one, of course, but.
Maybe just one last question. Yeah. So the last question that I'll take from the audience is in regard to the theme of this series, where ideas come from. The question is, how do you stay awake to your own ideas? And has your creativity ever fallen asleep?
No.
Never.
Oh, well, I never believed in writer's block because the question you have to ask is, well, block according to what standard of production? And I think often when we go to the root of ideas of being blocked, it's around capitalistic shame. Oh, I'm not working, I'm not really a writer, I'm not really a musician, I'm not producing. And when I was able to debunk that for myself, and I said, if I'm paying attention, I am working. If I'm alive, I am working. And it's true, you know, it's not even like me trying to be profound. I mean, my best ideas come like when I'm in the shower, when I'm talking to my brother, when I'm gardening, when I'm being with my dog, they just come. And I think it's about not judging what is like a valid idea. Early on in my career, a sentence would pop into my head and I would be like, oh, a poet should never think like that, right? I should never have an exclamation mark in a poem, you know. I always wanted to start a poem with the word hey. It felt so queer to me, like it was kind of like cruising language, you know, but it took me so long. It took me 11 years to put hey in a poem. And my only quest as a professor is to allow my students to get to hey faster than I did. But I had all this dogma that I had to undo, you know, and I think Buddhism teaches me that it's not about acquisition, but resistance. We think I get a degree, I have a lover, I have an idea. Do you have an idea, or does the idea embody you? I think ideas move through us like weather. Sometimes I have it and then it leaves me, and I'm like, I can't get it back, and I'll just have to keep waiting, right? It just moves through you. I'm suspicious about the metaphor of possession. In the same way, we talk about go find your voice. Where? To hunt it down? To colonize it? To repackage it? And I think to me, what we're really talking about is developing a voice you already have. That we all have this desire to articulate, whether it's music, fashion, art, painting. And life is about paying attention so that you can have more skills to dig. the Swedish director was right. It's about digging, I'm afraid, right? It's about getting as many ways to dig where we are as possible. And it's not about acquisition, but learning that the desire to move towards ideas. I think to me, like the perennial horizontal nature of idea is much more fruitful than capturing it. You know, Anne Carson talks about this when she talks about the bittersweet eros of metaphor. She said, a metaphor will never resolve itself, right? If we think about like, oh, the stars are like little boats rowed out too far. That's a line from Richard Seiken, right? A beautiful metaphor, and yet the stars will never be boats rowed out too far. As clear as that image is, it is ontologically impossible, but that is where the charge of Eros is. You know, there's a deeply queer mode to that, wherein we are more ourselves and more in love when we reach for the beloved rather when we touch the beloved. And so that ability to never resolve it, to only come close, is true to the Buddhist idea of life. Like there is no beginning and end to this. We're just in the midst of the horizon. And what we make on our way towards is the art. And so to me, it's like allowing things to be as they are, accepting people as they are. Like tonight, we came like an hour before, and we just like kind of messed around on stage until we felt happy. That was it, right? It was like, you make sounds, I'll make sounds. And then we started to really feel happy. And we're like, I think, let's say, Laurie, I think that's it. And she's like, yeah, that's it. And that's the best way to be. It's, you know, there's the Suzuki, the Zen master, talks about the joy of making. You have to feel joy in making even when it's absolutely difficult. Because the difficulty is the friction of your aspirations going up against the material conditions of your life. It is living itself, right? There's a reason why we can't just fly. We have to be in this body. We have to obey the physics of it. And yet we somehow miraculously keep making around it. And it has to do with an ethical mindfulness. It's not just, you know, I'm uncomfortable, I'm tired, I'm stressed, let me de-stress. It's about mindfulness, ethics, obligation, and community. Those are the ancient tenets of Buddhism. And unfortunately, the West, as it has been, is often selective with what it wants. And it's only taken the mindfulness, self-healing, and turned it into a commodity.
Laurie, I think your answer was no, that your ideas never go to sleep, right? Is that the sense I got? You too feel that creativity doesn't go to sleep. Is that right? The question from the audience about does your creativity ever go to sleep? It seemed like there's a hard no there.
Yeah. I don't mind when it does, I think, and I'm never really trying to find my voice, I don't think. It's never, or also to express myself. That's never been my goal as an artist. To say, you know, what I think or who I am. I don't care if you know me or not. You know, it's like that's not what I'm doing. I'm somebody who's just trying to go look over there at that thing, and I'm happiest when I'm nobody really, just lost or just have forgotten my idea of what was. I mean, I learned actually a lot about. Over at Prentice about that in sculpture when I get this big idea about what that thing was going to be about, and you try to push the idea into the material, and it just, you know, it doesn't work. It just falls in pieces on the floor. Yeah. You know, it's so to understand what your material is. Your material teaches you things, whether it's words or whether it's colors or so. And that's why we're not philosophers. We're artists making stuff that we often don't know what it means, and it doesn't matter what it means. It does some kind of motion like this. It makes you resonate with it. It's a resonance. It's not so much like X means Y. that's what's embedded in that work. I don't really care. And I also am happy sometimes to feel not so much the space of things, but the restraint. And so that what's happening now, we're unable, literally unable to say certain things. Certain things are not even allowed to, we're not allowed to say in our world. And we have also lost thousands of words in federal documents that have been scraped of words that are controversial, like women, Native Americans, equity. Those have all been scraped by teams of people who are not only scraping the words, but they're also hiding how they did it. So you don't know when it was scraped, when it was erased, how it was erased. And so they're just gone. So obviously, if you don't have that word, you forget what it might mean as well. So this is, but the advantages in that, I mean, I very always thinking of what Borges said about that censorship is the mother of metaphor. And I think that we can find some ways to use our minds and our language in creative ways within these constraints, even though we know that it's temporary, but it is real. It is real, the things that we cannot say. So are we just supposed to go, no, I should say whatever I want? Well, we're in a really unique situation in which our freedom of speech has been curtailed. And so what you do as an artist, I was on an artist panel a few weeks ago when we were talking about what artists can do now, and we all were just like, and of course AI came up and politics and all of this stuff, and at the end, the person who was running this panel said, I want you to each write down 2 sentences about what you want to do about this. And we all wrote down our 2 sentences. We all wrote down the same 2 sentences. It was eerie. We were not that connected in terms of what we were doing. And we wrote down, go to Minneapolis. And not to pester them or, grandstand or something, but just to go and find some courageous people who were helping each other, who were coming to the aid of their neighbors. And this was something we thought, let's be around that just for a moment. So I haven't gone to Minneapolis yet, but I plan to, just to celebrate this kind of way of being with other people, helping them, not just thinking, not writing about it or singing about it, but going there and standing there.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your attention and your care and your strength that comes through in all the work that you do. And tonight I wanted to end with actually the words from an 8th century Indian Buddhist, Shantideva, who said, "May all be freed from states of bondage. May they be possessed of wisdom, faith, and love, with perfect sustenance and conduct, without a trace of harm or enmity." Thank you.